And it's my privilege to introduce Mieko Uno to us in this room. Mieko I have known for a very long time. I know she is imbued well in Sacred Heart education, having started at 6 years old in Tunbridge Wells. And I remember her at that time, and our paths would cross later on as well. Mieko has been a mistress in Sapporo, and now doesn't just look after one school, but is directress of 7 schools in Japan. So I think sure she'll have many interesting things to tell us. So Mieko Uno.
Thank you very much. I would first like to express my gratitude for being given this opportunity to share about Sacred Heart in Japan. The 2 topics I given were the political and cultural context in which Seishin Joshi Gakuin, meaning Sacred Heart girls' schools and colleges, were founded, and reflections on how Japan educates women, which Mother Stuart wrote. I will talk on the role of our society in establishing women's education in Japan, and also how Mother Stuart saw Japan during her visit with some of my reflections. In the archives in Japan, I could not find much material concerning her stay, so my talk will be mostly based on the materials already written, and also those which Sister Margaret Phelan kindly sent me from the archives in Rome. In the middle of the 19th century, after more than 200 years of a policy of isolation, Japan opened her doors to the world and strove to catch up with the economic and social progress of Western countries. In 1905, after the victory in the Japan-Russia War, Pope Pius X sent Bishop O'Connell to express gratitude to the Emperor of Japan for the protection given to Christians in Manchuria during the war. The papal delegate was received by the imperial family and also spoke on public occasions, which arose requests from many intellectuals for the establishment of Catholic educational institutes committed to higher education. There were only Protestant institutes at that time. Catholics were working mostly in primary and secondary education. Pius X entrusted this mission to the Jesuits for boys, and this is Sophia University now in Tokyo, and to our Society for Girls. It was a time when our religious had to leave France because of the government's educational policy, so Reverend Mother Digby made the decision to send the Society to Japan. In December 1907, on the feast of St. Francis Xavier, Mother Salmon, Provincial of Australia, sailed for Japan with Mother Bridget Hayden and 3 sisters. On New Year's Day, 1908, they landed at Yokohama port and headed to Tokyo by train. Being 1 day earlier than expected, there was no one to meet them, with no meaning. At a loss with no language to communicate, they sat down and said their rosary. Then a priest, a bearded priest, just like Joseph, passed by and exclaimed, "You must be the religious of the Sacred Heart." This was Father Spener. He took them safely to the dam of the Sun Mall, where they spent their first night. The next day, they settled themselves in a Japanese house. The parish had prepared tatami, paper sliding doors. All must have been a completely new experience. On January 11th already, new pupils came to private lessons in English and in French. They were Fujiko and Kyoko, with the French names Suzanne and René, daughters of Baron Yoshiguro Ito. Their mother Mariko, a French woman, had studied in Sacred Heart in Paris. At the end of February, the second group of religious arrived from Europe. The house was too small to accommodate all, so a month later they moved into a wooden Western style house with no heatings at night. After supper they would dance with the chansons on the veranda to keep warm. The members were quite international, all English-speaking from various countries. Japan was an ally of England. US held a close position with Japan during that time, and as the other congregations in Japan were more French-speaking, the society took this direction. In April, Gogakko, later the international school, started with 7 students, mostly children from embassies or returnees. Classes were in French or in English. In May, gaining a larger property in Sankocho, the sisters constructed a school, building and prepared for the new Japanese school. So this was one of the first convents the sisters lived in. In May, and they built this wonderful Japanese school. Madame Hirata, a graduate and an English teacher of Tokyo Higher Normal School for Women, this is a national teachers training school. She was a very competent woman, came as the head teacher. She was very devoted and supported the sisters to root the Sacred Heart schools in the soil of Japan. In 1910, Gogakko, with a kindergarten, a primary school, and a 5-year high school, formally started as Seishin Joshi Gakuin with 22 students. Being able to start the school in such a short period was only possible because of all the support given from the ambassadors who knew our society from their various home countries, and also when we see the list of the names of the influential people in the political, economical, and educational fields of that time in Japan, who encouraged the sisters to open this school, we can understand the great expectation given to Sacred Heart education. So this is 1950. Okay. You wanted to see more? The Gogakko is the school for foreigners, and it's all English school, and this is the Japanese school. So, the exchanges with foreign countries that began with the Meiji Restoration, 1868, led Japan into a totally different world. The government modeled the new Japan after Western countries. In 1871, a government delegation set out to make an inspection of Western countries. 58 students with 5 girls from 8 to 15 years of age were included in the mission to study in the US. To build an equal partnership with Western countries, training personnel was an urgent issue. With the new educational system, public primary schools open to both boys and girls were established throughout the country. That education would cultivate people to improve life from within themselves and would enlighten the country to prosperity and true independence was a common view among the intellectuals of those days. There was also a strong influence from the women's liberation movement in the US. This was a great change for women who had always been educated to accept life submissively, but to abolish the old values and to see the social standing of women rise needed more time. A few higher normal schools for women were established by the government, but not many students would enter after graduating from primary school. On the other hand, Christian missionaries had a big role in this matter. With the opening of the country, the Protestants took the initiative of mission work, and many Protestant schools for women were established, which still continue today with their good work. These schools brought to Japan Christianity and Western culture, that is, English education, Christian values, respecting one as an individual, and the independence of a person. The Catholic schools came a little later with the dam of some more religious of the Holy Child, St. Paul de Chartres, and others. The Society of the Sacred Heart came still later in 1998. There were other private women's schools which did not claim themselves as Christian schools, but most were established under the influence of Western education or Christianity. Umeko Tsuda, a famous figure in Japan, who was one of the girls sent to America with the first government delegation at the age of 8, took an important role in the development of English education and contributed to women's education based on Christian values. The university she started is Tsudajuku University, very famous in Japan. And Japan Women's University, which Mother Stuart mentions, is one of these two. In 1940, when Mother Stuart visited Japan, Seishin Joshi Gakuin had just built its foundation. The high school was about to send out her first graduates, and the sisters were preparing for the opening of a school committed to higher education. I don't know if she wanted the higher education, but we came for the higher education. This was our main purpose. On March 11th, 1914, Mother Stuart arrived in Tokyo accompanied by Mother Marie de Baye and Marie de Samsam. Many, including the Marchioness of the former Japanese leader Tokugawa, who had been chosen by the imperial household to meet them, and the wife of the Italian ambassador, a cousin of Mother de Samsam, came to the station and led them to Sankocho. In front of the school, they were welcomed by Japanese students dressed in beautiful kimono, and I'm sorry, foreign students in their blue uniforms. During her stay, welcoming receptions were carried out, and Mother Stuart experienced Japanese culture to the full, such as flower arrangement, tea ceremony, Japanese dances and dramas. A famous Japanese historian and the professor at the school, Dr. Sanji Mikami, introduced her to Japanese history and culture and led her to know more of Japanese spirituality. She attended the closing ceremony of the school year, and all were full of joy at the distribution of certificates signed by Mother Stuart. The visit of Mother Stuart was, of course, a time of great joy and consolation for the sisters who had come so far away from their homeland. Many of them had been in Roehampton. They enjoyed their time with her in the community and received their status for the next year, and also the final permission for the opening of Koto Senmon Gakko, the new school for higher education, was given. Early in the morning of April 1st, she left Yokohama for Canada. Madame Hirata and 4 graduates accompanied her by train to the port. Mother Stuart appreciated the work of Madame Hirata and left the following words to the community concerning her role, so important for the society to become rooted in a different culture. And I think this is a very wise, these words are very wise. It is necessary that Madame Hirata's functions in the Japanese school should be very clearly defined, and we should not fail towards her in any prescriptions of respect which Japanese etiquette commands. This must be especially impressed upon young religious as a duty of obedience, whether they understand it or not, and no comment on her presence or work should be allowed before the children. So, how Japan educates women is an article written in the magazine Month as a response to the request of Dr. Mikami for her impressions of her visit to Japan. Education was a hot issue in Japan at that time, and her visit aroused much attention, not only of those related with the Sacred Heart, but also of educators outside of Sacred Heart. She was asked to visit institutions other than Sacred Heart and wrote about the Higher Normal School, the Pereses School, and Japan Women's University, all schools for women. The late Empress Dowager played an important role in establishing the former two, which shows the enthusiasm of the government for backing the development of women's education at that time. In the article, Mother Stuart writes much about Japan Women's University, founded by Mr. Jinzo Naruse. The establishment of this university, which is legally a professional school and not a university as people think, in 1900 was a turning point for the development of women's higher education in Japan. The founder, Mr. Naruse, was convinced that women's influence lies at the center of a nation's life and is the foundation of its strength, and that ignorance, inefficiency, and the inability of women to perform their duties was the cause of the nation's problem. For him, the aim of a nation should not just be prosperity and to preserve its national principles for independency, but to realize the true purpose of human existence. And for this, he strove to establish a university for women. To educate women as human beings, as women, and as members of community were his three educational principles. He pointed out the importance of women realizing their own worth and knowing that each had their own mission in life, excelling in the virtues which he held to be specially befitting of Japanese women: self-sacrifice, self-respect, and service, and sharing the responsibility of molding the nation, meaning to aid in the upward of progress of humankind. The educational view of Mr. Naruse must have had much in common with that of Mother Stuart, as he was a Christian, a rector, and had studied in US. I do not know much of how education of women was in England at that time, and which Sue mentioned a little last night, but she comments as follows. Concerning the higher education of women, it is impossible not to ask oneself the question whether Japan set out in wiser lines than we. And in fact, though this is in opposition to what is loudest voiced at present in England, whether it is not better that the movement for women's higher education should have originated with men and not with women. Instead of having to be battled for the detail, it has been comprehensively planned as a whole, and perhaps more quietly and meditated. It has a scheme of its own and is not attempting to graft itself onto another complete system which has no need of it. She was interested in the what was that? Science course. The domestic, excuse me, domestic. She was very much interested in domestic science. And it includes all things favorable for making of an intellectual home. So I think she felt women's education, higher education, aimed more for women to be intellectual at home. But it did not exclude that the other women, because women not all go into home, to have a, to be educated to work for something in the society. But Mother Stuart saw a few prestigious schools of that time and also felt the high quality of Seishin Joshi Gakuin, but not have able to grasp the entire picture of education in Japan. These are the pupils of that time. It's around 1912 to 1940, so probably they have met Mother Stuart. The kindergarten had boys, and this is our province, Sister Mieko Shinjo's father. I think in our province, Sister Mieko Shinjo's father met Mother Stuart. Actually, at that time, the governmental restrictions were quite strict to Christian schools. She wrote to Roehampton about a ceremony saying, very solemn, all standing with the reading of the imperial rescript addressed to schools in general on the value of education and the singing of the Japanese national anthem. Later, on the occasion of the crowning of the new emperor, with each school required to have the celebration, Reverend Mother Hayden mentions anxieties in a letter to Rome, that she had troubled thoughts about the first commandment during the bowing towards Kyoto, where the new emperor was inaugurated. The problem of the Shinto rites was always there. Religion classes were not to be held regularly in the curriculum. The religious took classes such as English, music, and art, where Japanese was not needed, and the Japanese teachers were responsible for the other classes. But even so, to see the intimacy and respect the students felt towards the sisters, the impact of the living presence of the sisters proved to be very strong. Mother Stuart's writings express her keen observation to what she sees. She was very much impressed with the happy faces of the Japanese children, including girls, but also realized that with the girls, this was so as long as they were little, and the trouble of life would throw their shadows over them earlier than the boys. Though there were movements for higher education for girls, they were open only to a few, and she could grasp the difficulty of the reality girls were facing. She was very much impressed and appreciated the manners and writes often of the ceremonial, polite bows, and even says, little boys and almost babies learn to bow. I don't know if babies really learn to bow, but probably the little boys learn to bow. Now I'd just like to point out two things from her reflections during her visit related to Japanese spirituality. During her visits to schools, Mother Stuart was quite impressed with the meditation time at the morning assemblies or at the beginning of classes in all levels of the schools. In visiting the schools attached to Japan Women's University, she writes, boys and girls are taught together until 12. In one of the classrooms, deep silence reigned. The children were sitting at separate desks, the boys' head bent, their faces buried in their hands. The little girls, more accessible to distractions, saw foreigners come in and smiled. This was the discipline of quietening the heart in another phase. As the teacher said, it was 5 minutes of meditation before lessons, a practice which opens vistas of possibilities. Quieting the heart was a time to train the children to self-control and lead them to a way of life, to go into one's inner self and grasp the spirit of the matter, and which we treasure now also. This silence would lead them to the second point, the idea of the way, with which Mother Stuart was very much impressed. She wrote a letter to the Assistant General, Mother Nerinx, with some of her impressions, saying that her heart hurt to see that this excellent kingdom should be in the darkness, and most would not seek God. But though she felt more distance than the Muslims, if the Japanese would know God and God's truth, they would easily accept them. She closed the article saying, the noblest qualities of the people should find their full expression in the Christian faith. They have a deep idea in the mental life of the need of a way. They are so fitted by much in their history and instinct for symbolism to understand many things which only find their realization in the way, the truth, and the life. She had sensed the potentiality of the Japanese in sensing things and seeing the essence of life in the way, and had the hope and conviction that the fruits of the mission to spread the good news would surely come in the future. In 1916, the first Catholic Educational Institute of Higher Education for Women in Japan, Sacred Heart Koto Senmon Gakko English Department opened. It was a time when people thought learning housework would be enough for girls after graduation of high school. Hence, only 4, including 2 from our high school, enrolled. The first graduation was held in 1920, and 2 excellent girls graduated. One of them, Wataru Kawase, who devoting her life to education, continued her studies in London University, taught in Koto Senmon Gakko, and became the principal of Obayase Sacred Heart, founded in 1923 in the Kobe area, and later in other private schools in Tokyo till her late 90s. Koto Senmon Gakko had to wait till 1930 for the number of graduates to become more than 10. Though small in number, the school sent out excellent graduates. The first two graduates succeeded in passing the English examination under the Ministry of Education to be qualified as middle school English teachers. They were the youngest who had ever passed the test. The graduates after followed them, and the school was given the right to confer the middle school English qualification without examination to all who studied in our course. In 1930, the Department of Japanese Literature, and in 1937, the Department of History opened, and each department obtained the same qualification. In 1940, when Japan went to war on a full scale, the control of the army towards schools became stronger, and it was a hard time for Seishin Joshi Gakuin. Administration by foreigners were not allowed. Madame Hirata and then Mother Monika Yoshikawa took responsibility of the school. They were like this during wartime. Provincial, Mother Mary Sheldon, and an Australian, and Mother Maya, a German, the two pillars of the province, supported the sisters in Tokyo and Obayashi. In 1942, the sisters, whose nationality was on the side of hostile allies, were advised to leave the country, and those who would not were interned in the concentration camps. In spite of being wartime, enrollment increased rapidly, but the students were mobilized to do labor most of the time. In 1940-10, on March 10th, the school building was reduced to ashes in the firebombing of Tokyo. The war ended in August. When the sisters came back from their places of refuge, they fell in dismay before the ruins. But encouraged by the words of Mother Maya, if God wills, He will surely give us work to do, and also the way and the help to do it. Trust the Lord and have no anxieties or fear. Let us trust that the Lord will do what is needed and have courage to move forward once more. The Lord will surely work for us. The sisters worked vigorously for restoration. Under the US occupation policy, there was a big shift in education from militarism to democratism. One of the new education policies was the improvement of the level of women's education, including equality of the studies in the secondary level between boys and girls, the realization of co-education in the universities, and the universities began to open their enrollment to women. Japan University Accreditation Association was organized, and with the enactment of university establishment standards, many higher educational institutes sought their way to be promoted to university under the new educational system. The Civil Information and Education section of US General Headquarters, GHQ, gave out a policy to promote some of the existing women's higher education schools to university, and gave importance to the founding of a women Christian university for the democratization of Japan. Under their advice, Seishin Koto Senmon Gakko formed an association with Japan Women's University and two others, and discussed their common issues to search for ways leading to the promotion to university. As a result, in 1948, among the first 12 universities approved, there were 5 women's universities, and the Sacred Heart was one of them. The approval of the establishment of Sacred Heart University was realized through the push of GHQ. A supporting committee for constructing the university building was established, and we can find General MacArthur, commander of GHQ, Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida, and other names of the dominant figures of Japan during that time in the name lists of the officers. The process of the establishment of University of the Sacred Heart shows the great expectation given to Sacred Heart education and to the newly democratic education in Japan at that time. Mother Elizabeth Britt, the first president who was obliged to return to the US during the World War II, studied university administration and student guidance in Manhattanville University, returned to Japan immediately after the war, and established a university with a tradition of liberal arts. With the opening of the university in 1948, Koto Senmon Gakko closed in 1950 with its last graduates. Around 1,000 graduates had graduated till this closure. Koto Senmon-gakko took an important role in the development of higher education of women. After graduation, many engaged themselves in educational work and proved the role of the school as a teachers' training institute based on liberal arts education. Also, data show that among the fewer than 1,000 graduates, more than 100 have become religious, which we can say is an extraordinary number when the percentage of Catholics is less than 1% of the population. It played an important role in the spreading of Christianity. And after promotion to the status of university, as the first women's Catholic university in Japan, many have found their faith in the 4-year study program and are helping in their parish, and also many vocations came from the university, not only to the society, but to other congregations. And many have taken the role in their congregation and in Catholic school, in other Catholic schools. After the war, many new Catholic schools opened with a strong movement of democratic education. The Catholic schools gained a good reputation and trust in the education for the whole person. And these Catholic educational institutes, including kindergartens, became the driving force for people to come into contact with Christianity. As I said, though the Christian population is less than 1%, Christian values are much appreciated by the people. As for the Sacred Heart schools, we are now 7. International School, and then this is Sankocho, and Obayashi, and by Sacred Heart, the university. And after the war, Sacred Heart 2 years professional training college, Fuji Sacred Heart, this is by Mount Fuji, and Sapporo Sacred Heart opened. Now more than 6,000 pupils and students study in our schools, of which almost 10% are Catholics, not to include university, and also depending on the school, like Tokyo has about 20%, International has 20%, Obayashi 10%, I think the Fuji and Sapporo has less than 5% or something like that. So there are not many Catholics there. So the graduates value the education they have received and are active in various fields, living the spirit of Sacred Heart education and taking her role. But now we seem to face another new stage in our mission. The rapid decrease in the number of children is leading the Catholic schools to a strong competition for survival. The decrease of religious vocations, the small number of Catholic lay staff in schools, the change of values and the way of thinking in a materialistic, competitive society tends to weaken the education for the whole person and is a challenge for Catholic schools to preserve their identity. And some Catholic schools are closing already. Mother Stewart wrote a short note on her departing Japan, saying, "This difficult mission seems to have had God's blessing from the beginning. It is well-founded, with Japanese and European schools, and a large number of private lessons through which gradually we may hope that souls will come to the knowledge of the truth. The advances made towards the Japanese are wisely slow, and they must be so, for any intemperate zeal could destroy the hope of doing real good. Japan's second spring has not yet come, but in the coming years, the Jesuit fathers have good hopes that it will bear fruit in abundance. In the meantime, there is much to be done and much patience to be exercised. The perfection of each member of the community will be the most far-reaching apostolate, and the spirit of prayer must pervade the house and the work." Reading this, the expression second spring left me wondering, what does she mean by second spring? Has it come? What's the first spring? At the end of her article, she also mentions of the hope of a glorious church to be. And these questions have led me to think of Christianity in Japan and what glorious would mean in a so-called mission country. Of course, it must have a different connotation after Vatican II, with the increase of religious vocations after World War II, and the people appreciating and accepting Christian values through their encounters in the Catholic schools. We might be able to say the second spring has come. But appreciating Christian values does not mean accepting faith in Jesus Christ. And the percentage of Catholics is still below 1%. With this reality, if Mother Stuart was thinking of the first spring as the time in the 16th century when Christianity first came to Japan, and a fairly large Christian group grew quite rapidly, which became an intimidation to the government. Then the second spring, which reminds us of a glorious church, would probably never come to be. Vatican II led the church to encounter and enter into dialogue with different cultures and faiths, and reminded us that to live and spread the good news is not only to gain souls to the knowledge and belief of Christ, but to bring inner personal transformation, which will lead one to a new way of life and transform the larger society into a more humanistic world. And this is surely a challenge for us to deepen and go more into the Japanese spirituality of the way, which Mother Stuart sensed in the culture and people, and to encounter there Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life, already living in each one of us. Thank you.
This is not a question, but I was impressed and struck when Mother Stuart visited Japan. She commented that the culture of Japan is the way. And often nowadays we talk about Asia. Asia is cultural way. But thinking of Mother Stuart mentioning 100 years ago, I'm very much struck by her intuition and her, deep, what you say, appreciation of Japan. So thank you very much for your comment.
Where you said, it mightn't be about converting everybody to Christianity, but it was about inner personal transformation. Could you repeat that last bit, please?
Yes. To bring inner personal transformation, which will lead one to a new way of life and transform the larger society into a more humanistic world.
Miko, just a question of clarification. When you were talking about the different schools, you mentioned Pieres's school. Can you just say what that is?
The Pieres's school is the school for the kids of There's a school called Gakushuin in Japan, and all the families of the imperial family goes there. It's an old school which this late Emperor Dowager started for the noblesses in Japan to study. That's the Paris school. And yes.
Well, yeah.
Thank you. When Mother Thornton was still alive, I think, did she not educate, was it Empress Michiko? Is she still alive?
Yes, Empress Michiko is still alive. Yes. About Mother Thornton, maybe Hiroko could talk more about Mother Thornton than me. No?
I was young. So I didn't know personally, but everybody said how wonderful she was. I mean, she was a good educator.
I'm good at passing on.
Excellent,
Thank you. I was very struck by the quote you used that referred to Janet Stewart's experience in the schools about the silence. And it resonates with, I think, a rediscovery across our cultures of the importance of silence and what Janet and others would call interior life. And I know, at least in the United States some years ago, some of the schools began adopting a little time of silence, which in some places, I don't know if you still call it espacio, which came from the chapter of 2000. But I was struck that that also was something that Janet remarked upon, because for Western culture, that's not necessarily the place we start. And it just confirms that that's part of the thirsting and longing that we all experience, but that your cultures have found a way, and may we continue to journey in that way. Thank you.
It was very interesting because, like silence meditation for Mother Stewart, it was probably praying to somebody. And then she went to one of the schools, and then they were in great silence, in rows, and it was good. But around the place they had this pictures, and she was so shocked. It was a picture of, I think, Momotaro. Momotaro is a peach boy, that kind. How can they kind of pray in this circumstance? So I think she saw things and felt it, but had culture shock in many ways.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much.